Today for this important discussion. I'm Congressman Pete Aguilar, and I'm joined with two guests today, Angelica Salas, who is the Executive Director of the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights of Los Angeles, or CHIRLA as we call it, and Todd Schulte, who's the President of Forward.us. In the past 4 years, we've seen the Trump administration enact countless harmful policies, many of which have been aimed at our most vulnerable populations. One community that's been disproportionately affected by these discriminatory policies are immigrant families, both here in the Inland Empire and throughout the country. From his relentless effort to end DACA to his cruel policy of family separation, the president has made clear that his administration will stop at nothing to target and vilify immigrants. That's why this conversation is so important. Todd and Angelica represent two amazing organizations who have been at the center of the fight for the immigrant community. They were also by my side as we worked to pass bipartisan DACA legislation in 2018 that fell a couple votes short, and they played huge roles in the passage of the 2019 when the House passed the Dream and Promise Act. So with that, I'll give them a chance to introduce themselves. Angelica, why don't you start first?
Sure. Thank you so much for having us. My name is Angelica Salas. I'm the Executive Director of CHIRLA, the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights. Our organization is a mass-based membership organization that works statewide on issues of immigrant justice. We seek to create a just society fully inclusive of immigrants, and we do work at the local, state, and at the national level with our immigrant community for a better tomorrow.
Thanks, Angelica. And Todd?
Well, I want to thank you for having us. It's a real honor to be here. As the congressman said, having been in the trenches, what CHIRLA does is amazing, and under Angelica's leadership, and Congressman, it's an honor to be here with you. And I'll just, I'll have the opportunity to say the great things we are so appreciative that you've done. But I wanted to thank you for having us. Forward.us is an advocacy organization. We are working to transform our broken immigration system, broken criminal justice systems. And, really for us, we have spent a lot of years playing defense here under the Trump administration. I am so thankful that we were able to sit here today having on like a fight around DACA, that while the Trump administration continues to want to get rid of it, we have been an organization who's been lucky to be in that fight. It's something that's incredibly important to us. Really, our North Star goal is how do we transform the immigration system that works for 21st century families for today's economy. And we believe that's, centered on a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million. And so happy to go into that and talk about it. But I just, so thankful to be able to be here today.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it, Todd. We solicited some questions. As you both know, I have an immigrant task force and immigration coalition task force and sounding board folks. And CHIRLA has a seat at the table where we talk about the issues that affect our community. And so we solicited some questions from them that'll kind of serve as the base for us to have a conversation. The first, probably best for Angelica and I, is specific to Adelanto Detention Facility. The question is, there's been a lot of concern about the Adelanto Detention Facility and the misuse of toxic chemicals used as disinfectants. What can we do to hold these facilities and the private companies that operate them more responsible for the harm that they inflict on our immigrant communities? And so obviously, this is something, Angelica, you and I have had a number of conversations on the immigration task force as well. What some of these private companies do is terrible and needs to be investigated, needs greater scrutiny. Your organization has been, at the forefront of holding those companies accountable and holding USCIS and DHS accountable as well. And we've tried to insert language in the appropriations process to do just that. But kind of the bottom line is, nobody should fear for their health. And that's the concern that we have, and what we're hearing back from families of those who were detained and those who visit are just the extreme conditions that folks are under. And so, what is the from your perspective, what is kind of the state of play right now and where we're at? Oh, we might have lost Angelica. I should also say that, well, I won't put you on the spot, Todd, but we can talk, broadly.
Yeah. I will, while I'm waiting for her to come back, I will just say, I think that, and without getting into specifics there, just maybe tell them as a background in terms of privately run detention facilities in general. I think people hear a lot about this in the general criminal justice space. I think it's really important to understand that in the general criminal justice space, about 8% of incarcerated folks are in a privately run facility, but in the immigration space, it's between 65 and 70%. And obviously, as we have seen with the spread of COVID, you're seeing worse conditions in those facilities. And so, without going into the specifics, we've wait for Angelica to come back, just to give some background. It's just such an important role, given there's just a small number of companies who, are in control of so many immigrants who are awaiting the result of an asylum hearing, for example.
Yeah, and earlier this week, a number of us from California signed a letter to Acting Secretary Wolf, talking about some of the harmful effects of these, chemicals that have been reportedly used at Adelanto. So, in a post, COVID world, we've just really got to be mindful of the conditions and of the experiences of those. And like you said, I mean, the majority of folks are, awaiting court hearings or awaiting, going through the justice process, and they shouldn't, feel at risk for their health while they're being detained, and that's clearly, what we've heard. But I appreciate you talking about the statistics from privately run prisons and detention facilities. Angelica, are you back?
I am back. This is a new reality, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The internet. But please continue.
I was talking a little bit about, and Todd, jumped in and talked a little bit about the private detention facility discussion from private prisons to private detention facilities, specific to Adelanto.
Absolutely.
We hear a lot of concerns. We hear a lot of concerns in our community. There were reportedly some chemicals that had been used on those who were there. What's the latest, and how can we hold these private companies accountable for their behavior during this time?
Oh, definitely. Well, the first thing I think that is important to know is that what's happening in Adelanto is happening system-wide. So what the kind of abuses that we see in Adelanto, the kind of harm that is happening to the detained population is unacceptable, but it isn't limited to Adelanto. And so these private companies, because that's what they are. This is an industry, and they're profiting from the detention of individuals. They have contracts with the federal government, and they're not fulfilling the safety and the well-being of those who are being detained. And so what we know is that about 20% of the of individuals are in ICE population right now are testing positive for COVID. And because they're living in overcrowded conditions, and these are issues that we have dealt with in the past. This is prior even to the COVID pandemic, the COVID pandemic. These are issues that we were fighting against even before now. But what has happened is that now people's life is at risk. That instead of taking care of the individual and providing them with testing and with health care, what they're doing is putting these really harmful chemicals in these facilities. The other thing that we know about is that in certain facilities, like in Bakersfield and in Mesa Verde, they just decided that, and in Adelanto as well, they refused to actually even test individuals. It took a court order to say, no, we need to test individuals in order to ensure the safety of the entire population. And so that is, and part of it is, kind of following the Trump administration saying, if if we don't test, then we won't know who is COVID positive, right? Like, as if that is the solution. No, we need to test. And what we found out is, like, for example, in Mesa Verde, is that almost half the population had tested positive for COVID. In Adelanto, what we see in Adelanto is, it is again system-wide. So we need to intervene, whether it's through the courts, but certainly I would say that we can no longer, stand by as a nation and have these private companies put people at risk.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I had shared with Todd that earlier this week, and I know it's a letter that you and Shirla supported. We sent a letter to Secretary Wolf talking specifically about the conditions at Adelanto and some of the chemicals that have been reportedly used there. So we want to continue to hold them accountable. We tried to put some language in the appropriations bills as well, and we're gonna continue to do our best to hold them accountable. So I appreciate that. Our next question from someone on our roundtable said, immigrants are essential workers on the front lines of this pandemic. What is being done to ensure that they can access relief in the next COVID package that Congress has before it? It's a great question, and House Democrats fought to ensure that every individual who paid taxes was eligible for the direct assistance payment is a part of it. Many individuals have been left out, including a lot within our community, and so we wanted to make sure that we expanded that, and that's what we did in the HEROES Act. But there are so many members in our community who are essential workers, and honoring the work that they do and protecting them is so important. Whether they're working in the grocery store or whether they're working in the agriculture community, we need to make sure that there are protections for them, so they are safe. So many individuals I talk to, live in multi-generational homes where parents, grandparents, might live with them, and they're fearful. The reason why they aren't signing up for work or have concerns, real concerns about their work environment, is because they don't want to put a loved one at risk. And so the backbone of what we're trying to do in this package is to protect employees, protect workers, continue having resources for testing and tracing and isolating. Those are the things that we know work, but there's plenty more to do, and we know that expanding the direct assistance to individuals is something that's important. The pandemic assistance for those, over 16 million individuals who are currently unemployed, those are the concerns that we have. But Angelica, you want to talk a little bit about the importance of protecting essential workers?
Well, absolutely. First, it does begin with making sure that our essential workers, many who are immigrant workers, but in general, that they have the protection, that they have the personal protective equipment that they need in their workplace, that the strict regulations within a workplace are also followed, and that they also have the care if they are in fact infected with COVID. And that they are not left behind. So to me, it really begins in protecting the worker in the workplace, but also in the community. And that I think what is now happening, which should have happened early on, is that now there's more targeting of getting some of this protective, personal protective equipment to some of these workers. The other area that I think is important is that many individuals continue to put themselves in this very vulnerable situation and continue to work in these in jobs that actually put them in in contact with many other individuals, because there is no safety net for them. And so there have been so many individuals that we have talked to who say, I just can't afford to stay home, and so I have to find, I don't have any kind of protection in terms of any stimulus relief. Many of the immigrant workers don't have access to any level of safety net. And that's why we're fighting at the federal level through the HEROES Act and pushing as hard as we can for full immigrant inclusion. That means that every single a taxpayer who files their taxes with an ITIN, who maybe, and the U.S. citizen and the legal permanent resident that is married to them actually has the stimulus relief and the economic relief so that they can make the best choices for their families, including continuing to be safe. This work can happen at the local level, so in our cities, making sure that immigrants are fully included in economic relief and rental assistance, food assistance, and also at the state level. And certainly our immigrant families need so much more in terms of support. The governor here in the state of California, for example, did provide $75 million for that was equivalent to $500 for 150,000 individuals. He said it was the first step. We're asking for additional support because we know that this economic relief allows individuals to provide food on their table and to just protect their families. There is a bill at the state level, AB 826, which has already come out of the legislature, which will provide $600 additional dollars in food assistance for all low-income individuals, but also includes the undocumented. This is what we have to do in this moment: protect everybody. And when we say these are essential workers, then we have to say they're essential and they will be cared for, whether it's in terms of access to healthcare, access to the safety net, or access to economic relief.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, well said. And I do have to say, while the state, can do more, and we would encourage them to do more, the state of California stepped up when the federal government didn't in the CARES Act because of Mitch McConnell and Senate Republicans. The state of California stepped up.
Absolutely.
We welcome them as partners, and we know that there's more that can be done. Todd, anything to offer on the essential workers?
I think just, reminding folks it's so important. It's been 111 days since the HEROES Act was passed. The ball is in the president's court and the Senate's court. And I think, just to echo what Angelica said, it is important to call people essential workers, but that should not be anything other than a reminder of how essential it is to give people that relief. And I think that it is, one has to look no further than back to the last time that 12 years ago when the economy collapsed. And it was really not until January of 2020 that Black and Latino households regained the wealth from that. It took about a third of the time for white households to do it. If you dig in on immigrant populations, you see kind of a similar, you have to center an economic recovery on immigrant communities. And I think it's so important that the HEROES Act is really just such a high watermark in terms of immigrant inclusion. And I think it's really important that we continue to fight for that moving forward.
Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it. The next question we'll direct at you, Todd, to start. Since the Supreme Court ruling on DACA, DHS has tried to once again limit the program to lock thousands of Dreamers out of the program. What can we do to protect DACA recipients?
Yeah. Well, I want to take a step back and just, I again want to say, I think that, one of the great wins of the last couple of years is keeping DACA in place. To me, just the reason that happened in part was because of just an incredible organized outcry, public support for the program, be it grassroots organizations like Shirla, be it, Congressman, the effort that you led. I mean, it was a 9-month constant drumbeat on Capitol Hill, and that makes a huge difference. It shows the real life consequences of this. The average DACA recipient has been in this country since they were 6 years old. They've been here for 23 years at this point. And like every single day for so long, showing the support and the breadth of support, puts the court in a position to understand there are real life consequences to ending it. And we won this huge victory at the end of June. They said the manner in which the Trump administration tried to end DACA on September 5th of 2017 was unlawful. The Trump administration was in open defiance of the Supreme Court for about a month. They then issued this memo saying that they want to shrink the program from a 2-year benefit, a renewable work permit, protections from deportation, to a 1-year benefit. They also said they're going to get rid of it after the election. Now, again, I think that's a testament to they're showing they've got kind of this shrink it and kill it later. It's awful, but a real testament to the work that so many people have done on this call that the president was scared to try to end it fully before the election. So where does that leave us? Number one, I think it is absolutely imperative. We're, you know, this is an official governmental call, but to center the immigration debate on the president is continuing to try to end DACA, and here are the real life consequences of it. You know, here is a teacher who can't be focused on teaching kids either in a classroom or remotely because they're concerned that the DACA may not be around for them. Here's an essential worker. Here's a family member. Here's a friend. We got to tell the real life consequences. You know, it has been a huge victory, and I think that public support is number one. Number two, there's a legal strategy where people are now pointing out that the GAO, or the Government Accountability Office, has said that Chad Wolf is not legally in his position, and therefore his DACA memo, trying to end DACA or shrink DACA, that he issued a month ago, is invalid. On October 7th, there's going to be oral arguments on that case in a case in New York. There are other DACA cases, and I do think there's some chance that DACA, that shrunken version of DACA, is going to be, that memo is going to be thrown out. And the reason that's so important is because right now, new DACA applicants are locked out of the program. You know, young people who are turning 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, none of them have access to DACA right now. That's been frozen to new applicants for 3 years. 3 years as of Saturday, actually. I think that, you know, telling the stories of, you know, young people who are getting out of school, they want to go continue their education, they want to get into the workforce, and they're frozen out of doing it, it's just really important. And so I think putting a face to those new DACA applicants who should be able to do it is important.
And keeping the steady drumbeat on the Senate, right? I mean, you know, the Dream and Promise Act was passed.
Absolutely.
DACA and TPS protections, you know, those are the things we need to remind folks who say that, you know, we need to do more. You know, this is why it's important to have friends in the Senate and allies down the street at the White House, and clearly that's just not the case right now. Angelica, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Can you see? I am here. So in terms of DACA, I think the first thing, and you just said it, the first thing we have to say is that we have passed HR 6, which is the Dream and Promise Act, and this will provide the folks with DACA and those without who've been shut out or who would otherwise qualify permanent status, and that's what we should be fighting for, the permanent status, so that these young people are not just left in limbo every single time that, you know, that whether it's through the courts or legislatively, it's time for them to be recognized as the Americans they are in a very formal way. But with that said, you know, we work very closely with DACA youth, and we, as one of our, you know, statewide, we have one of the largest immigrant youth organizations, the California Dream Network, working in over 36 campuses across the state of California. And then we also work with our young people in high schools. And I just want you to know that they're just so anxious because their life is just completely in limbo right now, given what's happening with you know, the Chad Wolf memo, which we are also fighting against, and we believe very much that we believe it's illegal. We also hope that the courts will invalidate it. But until that happens, what we want our young people to know is that we're here for them, that we continue to help them renew. And just yesterday, we were informed by the state of California that they have opened up legal services support, an additional $5 million across the state of California for young people to renew their DACA, so that we here in California continue as taxpayers to say, you know, we're going to support your renewal fees. And this is incredible. And I really want to also shout out to Forward US, who has been incredible. It's been an incredible partner in making sure that low income students are able, and immigrant youth are able to pay for their renewal fees, and so that they can continue to be protected. So that's the good news. And so I want to make sure that all those young people who are listening to us who have DACA, they know that there are many organizations like Chirla who are here to help you renew. And then I also want to send a message to all our undocumented high schoolers, our young people who haven't had access to DACA, to just say that in the state of California, we have fought so you can continue your education, so you have access to financial aid, in-state tuition, access to loans, so that you don't give up on that opportunity that education gives you, and that we're here to help you find your way and just really be with you in order for you to to just really follow your dreams, and that we will fight with you in order for the Dream and Promise Act to finally become a reality.
Thanks, Angelica. That's well said, and I appreciate you talking specifically to them. We need to let them know that we haven't forgotten them, and that the steps we're taking are inclusive of them, and we're very mindful of what they're going through, and we want to add stability to it in a very unstable time. And like you said, I want to give a shout out to Forward US and Todd and his organization, and a lot of the funders who continue to step up time and time again to make sure that cost isn't a barrier to people applying for DACA. So they continue to be there for folks, and we appreciate it. The next question relates for all of us. For USCIS has repeatedly threatened to furlough its employees in response to funding shortfalls within the agency. Can we speak to the importance of fully funding USCIS? And we hope that we fixed this issue. We passed a stopgap measure a couple weeks ago when we were in DC, and so we hope that fixes it. But USCIS historically has had a backlog, and they need to address that backlog. However, many of us are deeply mindful and skeptical that we don't give the administration the latitude to transfer resources to enforcement. And so that's why we continue to be concerned about the funding levels at USCIS, because we have seen Homeland Security time and time again take steps directly opposed to what the wishes of Congress are. And so we're going to continue to be mindful of that. But fully funding USCIS is important, and it's important work that those individuals do in processing citizenship documents for individuals. And Angelica, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Now, I think first and foremost, this is a crisis of their own making. So USCIS is tasked with processing the legal paperwork of individuals who are seeking citizenship, family petitions, and a whole host of other immigration benefits. And what they have done is they've refused to do their job. They have slow walked a lot of the processes, and this didn't just happen because of the pandemic, it was happening before. They are not administering many of these processes. And since USCIS is a structure, it's a government agency that is actually funded by the fees that immigrants pay in order for their services to be administered. If they stop taking in applications, if they are not fulfilling just these processes, of course they're going to go into financial problem. It's if they don't have any customers, then they're not going to have the resources available to actually conduct their business. And so now they're coming to Congress and asking for more appropriations. We think that we need to have USCIS functioning. Their functioning allows families to stay together. It allows employers to petition for workers, and it really it's such a vital function. So of course we're saying that we are supportive of the emergency stopgap measure and resources, but those resources have to come with accountability. That means that, like you said, they can't be transferred for enforcement purposes, but also that they actually are accountable as to how they're going to make their this system work, and I just think it's all around. I mean, I just saw the numbers around even asylum, 371 cases in the last quarter that were actually approved, and then in terms of the processing, that's just an example. And then with citizenship, there's over 300,000 individuals who are waiting to actually just have an interview right now. And many of those individuals won't be able to be interviewed and actually take their oath in time in order to vote in this election. And that's the kind of, I think, problematic action that this institution is moving forward. So we need to just hold them accountable. I'm a big believer. So let me just tell you, with that said, I'm a big believer that USCIS should be appropriated, that they should have resources in the same way, I would say, or actually to transfer the resources from ICE and CBP that I think is an overblown budget to USCIS, so we can function in this way. But at the same time, accountability and the fulfillment of customer service and the fulfillment of their job is required.
Todd, anything on USCIS?
I think that that point on accountability is so important. I think this is part of a pattern where you've seen this administration has, from kind of day one, attempted to make really every single, for the most part, immigration avenue to the United States more challenging, more burdensome, more expensive, and ultimately reduce it. They had a piece of legislation called the RAISE Act that cut the family-based immigration system by 85% and cut the overall immigration by 50%. They've used the cover of a pandemic to cut everything from the ability for U.S. citizens to petition for a family member to come to the United States, to the ability for manufacturing companies who may be working on supplies for a COVID vaccine to be able to bring people into the United States to do research. It's really kind of an across the board attack on immigration avenues, and that's before you get to questions about what they're doing at the border. It's before you get to questions about what they do for refugees, and obviously what you see for the undocumented community, folks who have a green card. And I think this fits into that, right? It is something where, USCIS is not an enforcement agency. It should not be an enforcement agency. You should not be transferring money to an enforcement agency, and it should be funded to be able to, really do the best of what America can do with its immigration system, which is we should have a modern, clean, fast, and I think affordable process so that people who are here have the ability to get permanent status and then become citizens. And so I hope that, if we get into a new political moment, in addition to some of these big ticket items that get talked about a lot, how do we have like a modern USCIS is really important for a functioning modern immigration system.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And the next question, Todd, just kind of picking up, still on this theme of accountability, the next question was, what can we do to continue to make them more accountable? We saw, this, I would say that the Homeland Security Appropriations Bill that we passed in July was probably the most, forward-leaning, Homeland bill that we've ever done, in an effort to hold them accountable, because this has been just a gradual erosion that we've seen, since Trump took the presidency. Secretaries Kelly and Nielsen, acting secretaries Albence and Wolf, and just, all the turnstile of leadership that they've had has been, very focused, very specific on how they demonize the immigrant community, and how they change their policies, transfer money to achieve that objective. And so, getting those priorities back in line is gonna take time. And while we're continuing these budget negotiations, we weren't able to get that bill, across the finish line. But our work's going to continue as we negotiate the next funding bill. But what do we need to be mindful of, when it comes to, holding DHS and ICE accountable, this time around?
I think first and foremost, like clearly explaining like what they're trying to do. I think that too often in the past, politicians were able to get away with saying things like, I love immigrants, but we're just trying to secure the border. We're tough at the border. And they get to kind of pick the battleground and how they want to frame these things. I think like explaining what the administration is doing here, like when they keep asking over and over again to double or triple or quadruple ICE, like what does that mean for communities? I will not speak to the incredible work that happened in Los Angeles. I'll let Angelica do that. But when they talk about what they call sanctuary cities, you know, this massive multiplier of trying to get local law enforcement to act as federal immigration agents. What does that mean? Well, you know, the way that shows up is, if people remember last spring in 2019, you know, when they threatened these raids and people spent 6-7 weeks not leaving their homes. This was, you know, not because of COVID, but because they were terrified of what enforcement could mean. I think it's really important to start with that frame. And I think from a policy perspective, we've really seen so much good growth over the last couple of years here, whether it was, you know, like the bed mandate. You know, we had for a long time, like we were legally required to put a certain number of immigrants in jails every day. I think the restrictions on transfer authority are really important. Obviously, we've seen it, I would say, a lawless presidency who's been willing to do that. And, you know, I think the proactive work to make sure that that transfer authority, yes, they take money from places and they push it to the border. But what we're not seeing is they're not taking, you know, money from places and trying to hire more ICE agents right now. And if that seems like outrageous, the sort of proactive restrictions on the transfer of funds is really important. And so I think that combination of a PR strategy where we all talk about it with legislation is really key. I think using oversight that obviously being in the majority and having subpoena power is very helpful to that. I think that's the third pillar of the stool. And I think where it comes in litigation, I think those are the tools available. I think they work well together. And I will just say, I think, you know, leaps and bounds ahead of where I think we were a couple of years ago, and a real testament to yours and others' leadership. And what you've been able to do with DHS is great. Obviously, a lot of work to be done.
Thanks, Todd. And Angelica?
Well, the first thing we have to recognize is that ICE and the Border Patrol, these are law enforcement agencies, and that they have to be made accountable just the way any other police department or sheriff's department is held accountable when they, you know, when they violate human rights, when they violate civil rights. So I think that this notion that they can just operate above the law or without regard to the rules that any other police department has to follow is unacceptable. So right away, I think the first measure of accountability is around resources and denying them the resources to continue to expand, and in their expansion, actually violating the rights of other human beings. And so I just definitely think that appropriations is a means by which to diminish their capacity. The other is to really recognize that there are bad actors and there are rogue agents who act absolutely with impunity, that they mistreat our community, they persecute them, they harass them, and that these are the kind of things that need to stop. And so there are bills that have been moved forward in Congress around this kind of accountability. For example, why doesn't the Border Patrol and ICE actually have body-worn cameras like we're demanding of every other law enforcement agency? So I'm very hopeful that with a Vice President Kamala Harris, who was the top law enforcement officer of the state of California, that we can begin to rein them in and recognize that we cannot have these rogue officers out there just creating so much harm in our communities. And then I think the other thing is to also hold them accountable in terms of documenting a lot of the abuses that have happened. And so definitely I think that's important. And then to what Todd was speaking of, here in the county of Los Angeles, our county board of supervisors, with the approval of our Sheriff Alex Villanueva, have made it permanent the decision not to transfer individuals from our county jail into ICE custody. Number one, because they know that right now it is a danger to their lives, given everything we talked about earlier around COVID, but also because it continues I would say, a coercion. It continues to be a coercion by ICE to use our local law enforcement agencies in order to ensnarl our immigrant community.
Oh, that's a great point, and we appreciate the leadership that we have in LA County. And I'm also reminded that I need to thank the chairwoman of the Appropriations Subcommittee for Homeland Security, Lucille Rebel-Allard,
Absolutely.
Los Angeles, who has been just such an amazing advocate, and for decades has been pushing for comprehensive immigration reform, and in her role in Homeland Security to hold the administration accountable. And that brings us to our last question, which will kind of pick up on that theme. And the question is to me, but I also want to hear the reflections of you, Angelica and Todd. What types of legislation? I'll change it a little bit. What types of legislation should the Hispanic Caucus, be working on to ensure our immigration system is just and fair? And I've been a huge supporter, as I know both of you are, for comprehensive immigration reform. Our system has been broken. It was broken for years. It was broken during the Obama administration, and it continues to be exacerbated and has only gotten worse under President Trump. This is not an easy process. It's not quick. It's going to take time. But we're working in the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and we have our own task force. Being led by Linda Sanchez and being well represented by Californians, working very closely with Zoe Lofgren and the Judiciary Committee, who would have to write up these bills. But our hope is that after the first of the year and the new leadership that you mentioned, Angelica, will give us a window and give us an opportunity to finally address this. And it has to start with protecting our communities and keeping our families together. And using those as the guideposts to what we do is going to be incredibly important. We're not going to have a lot of time, and so we're going to have to move quickly, and we're going to have to develop these principles and legislation with the mindset to be as forward-leaning and as broad to protect our communities, to reunite families, to make sure that we have a path to citizenship. Those are the things that bind us together, and that's going to be the focus of what the Hispanic Caucus and what my colleagues in Congress focus on. And Angelica, things that you want us to address and that are important for the community.
Sure. It's been now 34 years since we last had any level of immigration reform or a recognition that the undocumented need to come out of the shadows. 34 years. And so it's time that we actually have a legalization of all the individuals who are currently without status. Many of them, I just wanted to note, are actually in the backlogs, and individuals who are undocumented, but whose petition has not even been taken into account. They've been waiting years and years. So it is critical that we legalize our community. But one of the lessons learned from the Obama administration is, even as we were fighting for legislation, we didn't take advantage of two important levers of action, and one of them was administrative action, and we didn't, DACA did not happen until his second term, and so we need to do whatever we can on administrative action. So the way I see it is immigration action in every way, in every single day in 2021. Number one, we have to repair and reverse every horrible thing that the Trump administration has done. And that, needs to move forward. On the administrative side, we need to make sure that we work with the administration to hold back on enforcement. And that means that we cannot, seek to repair and also advance if we don't also stop the pain and suffering, the hemorrhaging that's happening in our community. And that can be done through a whole series of administrative actions. And it just gives us time for our community to feel not threatened in the way that they currently do. And in terms of legalization, I think it's important that when we think of legislation, we think a broad fix that is necessary in order not to continue to have people live in this country undocumented. But it also means that we have to create a program, a legalization program that's attainable, that's affordable, that individuals don't have to jump through, 20, 30 hoops in order to actually finally get the benefit. And so it is generous, even as it is rigorous, right? And in terms of what needs to happen in order to get to the to sort of the finish line. And it has to be done quick, because that's the other thing. We can't wait for another term. It has to be done as quickly as possible. So for me, that's that's certainly something that the Congressional Hispanic Caucus has always taken a leadership role in immigration. It needs to continue to do so, and it needs to be I would say vocal and visible in order to really represent the needs of our community. The last thing I want to say is 92% of the individuals who are enforced upon are Latinos. That means the majority of them are Mexican. They are Honduran, they're Guatemalan, they're Salvadoran. And if you add the South American individuals who are enforced upon, that means they're detained and deported. It's close to 94% of the people who are enforced upon. So the Congressional Hispanic Caucus has an incredible responsibility to stop that kind of just, I would say, constant persecution that our community feels right now.
Oh, those are great. Those are great points. Yeah. Absolutely. Todd, do you want to talk a little bit about, the importance, kind of building on that, the importance of action, in every way.
Yes. I will pick up on, I think the two things on that I think are so important. Number one, this is a dual track to what Angelica says. There's a legislative track and there's an administrative track. And those both have to be moving from day one. I think that there is a project that tracks the changes that the Trump administration's done on immigration through policy. It's at, I think, 812. 3 of those are changes we would say are good. And one of them has to do with eliminating the need for faxing things, which I'm all for. But, the quantitative side of the scope that we need to get out of matches up to like the deep moral stain and the harm that people have felt here. I think it's just important to frame this too in a way where, if you look back to 5 years ago, the kind of original sin of Trump and Trumpism, when he came down that elevator, it took 121 seconds before he started saying horrible things about Mexicans and horrible things about immigrants. And he has done that every day since. And whether those are things that grab national attention, like people going to airports, whether it is when people realize that, a deportation and an arrest can happen in their rural community that they didn't think of before, whether it's high profile cases of the Supreme Court or it's family separation. We need to take the strength and that power that's been built, but transform that into, take a long broken system, one that was, built by both parties in some ways, but that Donald Trump weaponized. And the way to make sure it never happens again is that day one prioritization. And that comes with that transformation through comprehensive immigration reform. It comes through those administrative levers. And I really believe, to Angelica's point, doing them at the same time is absolutely the way to go. I think it puts pressure for everybody to act. And, the fierce urgency of now, because we don't have time to wait. If you think about folks, the average undocumented person's been here for about 15 and a half, 16 years, but 40% or more have been here for 20 years or longer. A lot of people came here in the mid 90s. A lot of people who are in Angelica's office and in Southern California, and they've been here for 25 years. They've been here for 30 years. They don't have another 10 years to wait before they get on a pathway that might be not, just a couple of years. I'd like it to be really short. But we need that pathway. We need to be workable, affordable, accessible, and we need it now. And so that's how, we're excited to be working on that, hopefully in a new political moment.
Absolutely. And we stand ready. And like I said, historically, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus has played a role in that. This is a moment when we need, that leadership. And I look forward to working with my colleagues to meet that moment. But like you both said, this is a dual track. And so we have to push the administration. And with that, we're going to have our opponents say, well, you're doing things administratively, so I guess we don't need, legislation. And that's that there will always be excuses, not to do something when it comes to comprehensive, immigration reform. That's another one of the lessons that we've learned over the years. And so, we need to make sure that we stay true to that. I want to thank both of you for taking time out of your day and joining us. Angelica Salas from Chirla, who has been just an amazing resource to me and my staff and my office. You have always been there to answer the call of Inland Empire families specifically, not just be our sounding board on legislation, but to put boots on the ground and to have folks in our communities helping people navigate the system and helping bring a more humane posture to the role that we are in. And Todd Schulte with Forward US, who has numerous text messages from me late at night when I say, "What does this mean, Todd?" He often puts his decoder ring on and tells me the straight scoop.
Hopefully that's not about my typos, but I will say, it's an honor to work with you. And for those listening, like not a platitude, a true champion. And we, for immigrant families everywhere in the country, but especially in the empire. So thank you for having me here, Congressman.
Thanks, Todd. Angelica, closing thoughts?
And likewise, I just really want to say thank you to you, Congressman Aguilar. It's just such an honor to work with you. I want everybody to know how much you care, how hard you work for our families, and how you just roll up your sleeve and get the work done. And that's the kind of leadership that we all deserve. So thank you so much. And also, it was just so wonderful to be here with Todd and the great organization Forward US that he represents. And I think that we have to keep working hard because our families deserve it.
Thank you both so much. I want to give a shout out to our immigration task force as well for supplying the questions. Danny Meon, my staff, for his support and help as well in making this possible. So thank you guys so much. Thanks for tuning in. And if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to contact our office for those watching at home. Thanks a lot.